And then we can give a couple minutes just to chat, can see when
Yes.
people are coming in.
Well, if your weather follows the Midwest, maybe you're on a warming trend in the next couple days, and we're in the 40s now.
What? That is balmy around here. My goodness.
Hmm.
I don't think we've seen 40 degrees since before Christmas.
Oh yeah, we set some record for the longest number of days below freezing, and it only stopped a couple days ago. So,
Yeah. That's oof, really hoping for that one.
well, I remember one year, this is the year we moved back from England. This has been a while ago. It was February. We just moved, and in Illinois, it was 80 degrees.
What?
80. That was
Wow.
bizarre. Yeah, I remember thinking, oh, the plants are going to be super confused. They won't know what to do.
Wow. It's funny. My dad sent me an article that Hawaii is expecting a snowstorm.
What?
Like,
Is that
and
possible?
I don't know. I guess so. I
Oh,
don't know, but they were saying that they're trying to somehow prepare for that. And I was like, no,
wow.
I'm sure they're not going to be prepared for that if it happens,
Oh
but
no, I thought that's the whole reason people move there is so they won't ever have to deal with it ever again.
maybe.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know. Well, okay, let's see. So there's about we have a few people here. We're just everybody who's coming in, we're just chatting away here and getting started, but let me get started. My name is Jill Kenny. I'm from the Chelmsford Public Library, and we are here for a fun program today with Claire Evans. And I wanted to give a little blurb about her. So, Claire Evans is an author, former journalist, attorney, and college lecturer who started her love of most things British as she and her mother watched countless Britcoms on PBS. She studied abroad in London, and against the odds, she married a Brit she met in Peoria. Is it Peoria?
Peoria.
Oh, yep.
Every single vowel pronounced. Mm.
Okay, Illinois. They lived in England for a number of years. Her business, Tea with Claire, grew from friends. Sorry, let me scroll up here. With friends asking for travel advice. Her memoir, High Tea and the Lowdown, is a true story of what it's really like to marry a witty Englishman, move to Britain, and make every cultural faux pas imaginable. Wow. Fun fact, I did a study abroad in England as well.
You did. Where was yours then?
In London, Goldsmiths College.
Oh, right. So mine was we just used the dorms of UCL up by Euston Station, but it was through Notre Dame here.
Mm. Oh,
So
nice.
yeah, so
Wow.
you get to know it pretty well if you hang out for a while. So you
That's
would know.
true.
Yeah.
Well, good segue. So we're going to hear from you on this British spy
Yeah.
talk. So,
Well, they always say if you love it enough, you find your way back. And that's been true about once a summer, we try to head back. So what you're seeing today, the art of British spycraft is the fruit of last summer's vacation. So not only will you see some of my, or just the facts and the highlight reels, but you'll see some summer vacation pictures in here too. So if thank you to Jill for doing my little blurb introduction. If I do my own, I just keep going. My daughter who's 10 calls it yapping. Apparently
mm,
that word is coming back. I read about it this morning in the New York Times. So all right, well off we go. And I was super fortunate to find a very fun theme. It looks undercover. For the talk, I thought that was particularly appropriate. So yes, I had to decide what are we going to talk about because it's a fairly broad field, and I just so happened to pick four authors, and they in life are almost exactly a generation apart. So we'll talk about the four authors. Of course, Ian Fleming's in there. How could he not be? And then I've wedged in, it's redacted here, Bletchley Park in Milton Keynes. A bit of a segue, most relative to Ian Fleming and John le Carré, about the super secret location in England, not anymore, but it used to be in World War II, where they did code breaking. And that's where we visited last summer. So Let me catch you up. There's a lot of terms thrown around when you read British espionage, and some of the things they're talking about have US corollaries, but what I'm going to talk to you about today is particularly just the British version. So, MI5 is the home or domestic section of the Secret Service Bureau of the UK. Now, as a corollary, that corresponds most readily to our FBI. Then there's MI6, which is the foreign section of the Secret Service Bureau, and that would be more like our CIA. So the head of MI6, if you are a Bond fan, in life is known as the letter C, C. So there's something also called the Official Secrets Act. And the one that I'll talk about was in place from 1911 to 1989. There is still such an act on the books and in the laws of the UK. It's changed a bit to accommodate newer technology. And then the last thing is the GC and CS. Everything has an acronym, which codes, it's the Government Code and Cipher School. Very British way of talking about it in code is the Golf, Chess, and Cheese Society, which apparently was the nickname. The sense of humor is alive and well. So, just so you know, too, a little bit of trivia. Code versus cipher, they are technically different things. So, a cipher is a very basic form of encryption. Actually, I say very basic, it can be quite complex. Stay tuned. But it substitutes letters in a message or numbers. But it's a one-for-one swap where a code they replace entire words or phrases. So you can speak in code and still be speaking English and not be understood. I'll just ask my daughter on that one. So if you're a fan of British film or TV series that feature MI6, you may be familiar with that building. So this is the current building of SIS, otherwise known as MI6. And if you are at all a London fan, I like to kind of orientate myself by using the map. And first, when I look at the map of London, I always go to see where the Thames has that big dip in it. So if you were to follow the Thames headed west from there, you get to the area called Vauxhall, and this is on the south bank of the Thames. So coincidentally, fun fact, it is on the site of the former Vauxhall Leisure Gardens, and that was London's first tea garden. If you're at all a Bridgerton fan, not that we cross-pollinate with our genres here, but that pops up from time to time, as I mentioned in the series, and it started in the 1700s and even went late into the 1800s. So this new MI6 building opened in 1994. The old building had served its purpose, to put it kindly. It was deemed a security risk for a number of reasons, the biggest one being there's a gas station at the old building's base. Talk about inflammatory. So, not that I would know this personally, but urban legend says that the current MI6 building is a bit of an iceberg, so that you actually see much more above the surface there is more below the surface than there is sitting above. The other problem with the old building was that it was technically a secret. It was supposed to be in a secret location, but every single cabbie in London knew where to take tourists if they wanted to see it. So about the Official Secrets Act, because this law affects 3 of the 4 authors that we're going to talk about. This was a document, you see a version of it here used for the British Army, but it really put the fear of God. It threatened people either in the service or in the employment of the government that even while they were out and time had passed, that they were not to disclose anything that they learned in the course of their employment or service under penalty of prosecution. And there is an exception, though there would have to have been, because 3 of our 4 very much used things that they might have picked up in the course of their military service. And that was that if you had plans to publish a manuscript that included any of the information that you acquired in military service, that you had to submit a copy of that to the Ministry of Defense for approval. And so there was a way to do it, if you did. And that would have certainly applied, although he was at the top, so perhaps it was more of a rubber stamp, to the first guy. His name's John Buchan, the first Baron Tweedsmuir. So his dates are 1875 to 1940. He did a lot of things in his lifetime. He was a novelist, a historian. He served as a British Army officer, and later in his life, he was even the governor of Canada. But as writing goes, he was prolific. He wrote more than 100 books, but only 30 of them are novels. So when you go to see his collected works, you'll find things like a treatise in international tax law. Well, not exactly as riveting as some of his others. So he started to write around age 20. He had a pretty modest childhood. He grew up in Scotland, and he attended university at Glasgow and then at Oxford as well. Be aware, this is a recurring theme. Either Oxford or Cambridge education, and the privileges that it can gain people, particularly in times gone by. Now, that's still true today, but even more so, the class system in the UK was very much relied upon in times past. As I say, it's even today you can still see it's still there, but it was almost like a stamp of approval. And that comes back to bite the British government in kind of a spectacular way. More on that in a few minutes. So he was a practicing barrister, he was a journalist, he was a private secretary of a man who was a close advisor of the British Prime Minister. Well, here's an example of access. He was educated well and in the right circles, and then that opened up doors of privilege for him. So he went on to become the Director of Information in the First World War and later head of intelligence for a newly formed Ministry of Information. So literally, he's a spy master who happens to have a talent for writing. So his most famous work is The 39 Steps. It originally came out more than 100 years ago. Seems like it shouldn't be that old, but 1915. And then people can be familiar with, there were several movie versions of it made, but the most famous was made in 1935 by Alfred Hitchcock. So that book introduces an action hero named Richard Hannay, and he goes on to feature in four more novels of John Buchan. But he gets credit for introducing a trope, a plot device, where you've got an action hero who's on the run from some evil group. And that idea has pretty much been continuously used in this genre of fiction ever since. It's never died. It certainly comes up in the next novelist that we'll talk about. So without ado, here's the big one, as you might have anticipated, Ian Fleming. His dates, 1908 to 1964. Oh gosh, you think, if you're quick on math. He was fairly young when he died, and that is true. He died at age 56, and a clue lies in the picture. He was a very, very heavy drinker and a 3-pack-a-day smoker. So he was a novelist later in life and a British naval intelligence officer. Before that, he was a journalist, and before that, he was a phenomenally unsuccessful stockbroker. So he's an interesting guy. It seemed like people either really liked him and they found him very magnetic, or they were repulsed by him. He was quite polarizing that way. So it is fair to say he had a reputation as a rather prolific womanizer. He was a very weak academic, but he was very strong athletically. Now, he went, in addition to Oxford before, and here's some more fabulous school names to throw out. He was a student at Eton and Sandhurst. So Eton is a very, very elite private boys' school. William and Harry were educated at Eton. And then Sandhurst is the equivalent of the U.S. military academy, West Point. It's the Army Academy for the UK. And as many children, particularly boys of his age would have, and his wealth, he came from new generational wealth. His grandfather made great money for their family. He became known as a leading expert in the UK for people of high net worth, how to invest in U.S. railroads. So he was a investment broker and started a bank. So Ian Fleming, that is, could afford to go to boarding school, and he had some fairly brutal experiences while he was there. He's well educated. They sent him to school in Austria to improve his German, which would be interesting when people in power in Britain found out that he spoke German. So it so happened that the man that ran the school was a former British spy himself. That was fortuitous, and he also encouraged Ian Fleming to write. So from there, he went on to university in Munich and Geneva, and he worked on German some more, and then he worked on French. So, thinking he would like to be in foreign service, he took the Foreign Office exam in the UK, and he did not, it's not a pass-fail, but put it this way, he didn't get a sufficiently high score to be considered a job prospect. He got no job offers. So his mother's a socialite. His father had died young. His father was a World War I hero who was a very good friend of Winston Churchill. And his very socially connected mother then scrambled and found him work at Reuters news agency. So Reuters sent him to Russia to report, and he actually got a letter from Stalin turning down an interview request. So, not that he got to do that interview ever, but that sort of brought him to the attention of British intelligence for a number of reasons. So, he's a bit of a black sheep up until World War II breaks out in 1939 for England. He did, though, in the war, he got it together. He really got himself organized. So, he is recruited as the assistant to Rear Admiral John Godfrey, who happens to be the director of British intelligence. Oh, so he, though, himself, Ian Fleming, will rise through the ranks, and by the time his service is done, he will be a lieutenant in the special branch of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, which just so happens to be James Bond's rank. So, why did he get this job? Well, he went to the right schools, he's highly connected, he's personally charming, and a lot of people figure, well, he saw action in the war, he must have written about it. Actually not. He is privy to so much classified information by virtue of who he works for and in what office that he didn't see much action at all during World War II. He simply knew too much if he were to be captured. So he does have a very vivid imagination, though, and that was even on display in his work in the intelligence offices because he hadn't started writing quite yet. And his office was tasked with concocting counterintelligence plots, one of which he wrote a memo about that he came up with, but it was considered far too far-fetched to ever fly. Well, here's what he wanted to do. He wanted a German plane that had been captured by the British, but still was, recognizable as a German plane, to hold a crew of British airmen that were actually dressed as Nazi flyers to fly into the Atlantic Ocean and crash in the sea path of a Nazi boat that would pick them up as a rescue. And then, once upon the boat, the British crew, undercover, would then kill all of the crew of the boat and nab the secret code book in the code room that was the changing code daily for the Enigma machine. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So how the Nazis, how all of their command sent messages over radio. Really valuable piece of intelligence. Well, what are the odds that the crew would even survive the crash? So they just ruled that one right out. And though there was a fairly famous plot that came out of his office that was pretty crazy logistically, but they did it. And there's been a great book written about it and a film made about it. And I hear it's a comedy now, a musical on Broadway, Operation Mincemeat, which you would not think if you know the story, it would lend itself to comedy. But I think I gotta go see this. So British dropped a dead body off the coast of Spain, a fresh cadaver, and it was dressed in British military uniform, and it had secret information in a briefcase latched by handcuff to the cadaver's wrist. So their hope was, of course, this is all misinformation. They want to throw the Nazis off in their invasion plans for Sicily. So it worked. that they were hoping that the information in this briefcase would get filtered up the information chain and make it to Nazi high command, and then they would act on it, and they did. So that was a success. So Ian Fleming, though, does get a business trip during World War II. In 1942, he's sent to Jamaica on a naval operation called GoldenEye. And they're there to talk about Nazi U-boats and that have been spotted in the Caribbean. So he had also read a book called Reflections in a Golden Eye by Carson McCullers. And he is interviewed, especially once he gets famous later in his life, not too much later. He's interviewed and he's talking about what his plans were for after the war. So he said, I swore that if I survived the contest, meaning World War II, I would go back to Jamaica, buy a piece of land, and build a house, and live in it as much as my job would allow. So after the war, he does find a job as the manager of all foreign correspondence for the Sunday Times of London. And as part of his employment contract, he gets off 3 months a year as holiday. So he goes and his plan didn't exactly work the way he described it. Yes, he acquires an estate in Jamaica and he names it GoldenEye. He bought it, it was bought for him by a mistress, apparently. But you can see there he is even smoking on the beach. He came here to write, and he wrote his first book, Casino Royale, here in 1952. So he's got an insider sense of espionage because he's privy to those sorts of things from his war service, but he pretty much lets James Bond conduct all the daring missions that he didn't in the war. So every book that he would publish for the rest of his life was written in Jamaica. And so he dies in 1964, but he's a phenomenon in his lifetime. He gets famous. It just so happened, though, if you have an itch to go see what inspired him, you absolutely can if you've got the budget. So the story is that in 1976, GoldenEye, this property formerly owned by Ian Fleming, he's been dead for a number of years by now, it comes up on the market. And at the time, the founder of Island Records, his mother had had an affair with Ian Fleming and knew GoldenEye to be a really nice property because she had spent time with there. And she told her son, you ought to buy this. So he did. And he used it as kind of a record company hangout for quite a long time. Sting wrote Every Breath You Take there at the property. So over the time, though, they developed this into one of the most exclusive hotel resorts in Jamaica. In fact, the Caribbean, it gets very highly rated. I think I looked out of curiosity. The least room rate for this hotel is in the neighborhood of $900 a night. So I cannot say I have been to do reconnaissance on business. So as for writing goes, what were the real threads of what informed his books? As he sat writing in his bedroom, he spied on a bookshelf across the room a book that he owned, The Field Guide of Birds of the West Indies, by an American ornithologist named James Bond. By coincidence also, there is a real-life reference to 007. It did mean something. It referred to a World War I German diplomatic code that was broken. So back on James Bond, though, why did he pick that? He told The New Yorker when he got famous in an interview, I wanted the simplest, dullest, plainest sounding name I could find. James Bond was much better than something more interesting like Peregrine Carruthers, which would have been people at school he would have been bumping into named Peregrine. So exotic things would happen to and around him, but he would be a neutral figure, an anonymous blunt instrument wielded by a government department. So as for characters that pop up throughout Bond books, there is one particular one that in life has a corollary, Charles Fraser Smith, and his dates are similar to Ian Fleming's, although he's much longer lived, 1904 to 1992. So he starts out as a missionary, a British missionary, and he is giving a sermon when a couple of people in the Ministry of Supply, the government branch of that, listen to what he's saying about how he has a talent for finding supplies from pretty much any available source. So he gets recruited. And once war breaks out, then he can source things, we'll say. And so his academic record was not glowing. They said he was scholastically useless, except for woodwork and science and making things. Well, I don't find that to be useless per se. So once he is put into service for the British forces, he takes special requests. For example, the army would like a device that does this or that, and he started to call them Q gadgets. So, for example, some of the things that he developed in his time were a hidden document container. It was a thermos, but it was threaded backwards. It didn't screw the usual way, and it would have held rolled up documents. But the point, they thought, was that it would never occur to Germans to ever try to twist the screw backwards because they were just too logical. He also came up with compass cufflinks, maps printed on silk handkerchiefs, and shoelaces that doubled as saws. So, well, Ian Fleming wrote a ton, considering he really didn't start in earnest until after the war. And he's got 12, yes, 12 novels, short story collections included, all of which have been made into films and then some. They kept going and going. He's written a few other assorted works too. His brother was a travel writer, Peter Fleming. He was pretty well known. And so Ian took a little shine to that and tried it once too, Thrilling Cities. But I think the funnest thing on here is that Ian Fleming, I would say, wrote the most famous book about a car ever. And that was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. That's an Ian Fleming book. It came out in 1964. So, as I said, he got famous in his lifetime. Bond really caught on, not particularly with the British public, but worldwide too. So why was that? Well, there was what was happening in reality versus what Ian Fleming described James Bond's life was like. So on that topic, he would give these lavish descriptions of Bond, particularly his dinner. He was kind of a bit of a foodie. So he enjoyed steak with béarnaise sauce, and he's writing all this in books. Asparagus, lamb, pineapple. He would visit these far-flung destinations. Ian Fleming would ultimately go see them before he'd write about them after the war. And then he's independently wealthy. He never really worries about funds or a paycheck. And you could say that he was probably one of the first practitioners of brand dropping. That he mentioned brands by name, particularly Aston Martin cars, Rolex Oyster Perpetual watches, Taittinger Blanc de Brut champagne. These were his favorite things. Well, here's the reality. So in 1954, the veil of British rationing finally ended. Bananas are completely exotic. So if you could get pineapples or along those lines, this is just complete luxury goods. In the worst of rationing, milk is powdered in the UK. A man is allowed 2 ounces of bacon or ham per week, an ounce and a half of cheese, 2 ounces of tea. I find it funny that they get more tea than cheese, and an egg every 5 days. So what food you did get was usually tasteless. So this Bond existence is escapism at its finest, and it gave this really high sheen to British intelligence that would carry it through some pretty serious gaffes, which are coming up. So the hero in Bond always does the right thing. There really is never any moral ambiguity, and over time the USSR is the big adversary that he's always up against. So we'll divert a bit into something, though, that Ian Fleming was well aware of because of his status and his access to top secret documents and information, his clearance, and that's Bletchley Park. So Bletchley is an estate. It's outside a town in the Midlands. It's called Milton Keynes. And it's particularly situated well if you want access to London and the 2 universities. So it's only an hour out of London by train, and then 36 miles to Oxford and 49 to Cambridge. So Ian Fleming absolutely worked with Bletchley Park. The British government bought it. It was a country estate. and they set up their headquarters to the GC and CS, the Government Code and Cipher School there. And so its entire reason for being was to break Nazi codes. And that was done in earnest once Britain entered World War II in 1939. So they have thousands of codes of taken down messages that fly through the radio airwaves daily. And this is the headquarters of where they're trying to crack them. They wanted proximity to the military, so it's close to London, and they also wanted closeness to the academic homes of some of the code breakers that they recruit out of Oxford and Cambridge. Here's vacation pictures. So yes, it's lovely. The manor house is what you see in front, but then over time it becomes quite a complex. It's very well guarded, and they build these little huts out, and every hut had a different function. So it's really large, deceptively so. The townspeople knew something was going on there at the time, but they really had no idea what. And so they did a phenomenally good job at keeping secret what the actual function of Bletchley Park was. They codenamed it Station X. That was its reference during the war. So as it was at its height, it employed nearly 9,000 people, and 75% of those people were women. So they are all bound by the Official Secrets Act for sure. So not only did they not want them discussing any of their work outside their work environment, but even when they're off duty, they're not to talk about it with coworkers, because they very much compartmentalize the task of code breaking. And there can be very mundane bits, but each function is separate, and they don't want anybody to have enough critical mass of information to actually put together what are they doing in total. So in the beginning, only half a dozen people knew what was happening at Bletchley. By the end of the war, that expanded once America got involved in the war too. But overall, it's all considered very top secret. So in 1974, though, the lid kind of got blown. There was a man who supervised distribution of what they called ultra intelligence. That is the intelligence that comes out of Bletchley Park. And he would go on to become head of the air section of MI6, and he writes a book called The Ultra Secret, and it exposed what was happening. Well, it's 1974 by this time, so enough time has passed since the end of the war. But that was the first time that anybody actually knew exactly what was happening there. And some of the workers, granted, there are very few still with us today, but even when they were alive, even 5 to 10 years ago, they still wouldn't talk about it because they were threatened under great penalty under the Official Secrets Act if they did. So ultra intelligence is the name given to there's data and then there's intelligence. So Bletchley Park would be tasked with uncovering the data, but then they cross-reference it and they make it into intelligence, something that actually has meaning. So this machine that you see is called the Enigma. It's a cipher device. It was originally made in the 1920s, so it had been around for some time before it was used by the Germans to encrypt all military correspondence. So the deal with how this worked, it's fairly portable. You can certainly take it on a U-boat. That's what one of its popular functions was. So it has a rotor system in it. It looks like a little typewriter. It has keys. Then it has above those keys another keyboard that lights up. And there's different wiring settings. You can plug and unplug. And there's these rotors that you set to different settings every day. And the Nazis issued a code book in which they published the rotor settings for a month. So that's what Ian Fleming was interested in getting hold of. Once you hadn't had an Enigma machine, if you had the code book, you're good. But they knew the code book was so valuable, they printed it in water-soluble ink. So, and everybody that operated codes for the Nazis had a bucket of water next door. And should they be breached or at all compromised, they throw that pamphlet of that month's codes into the bucket and all of the ink dissolves. So This Enigma machine, the Germans thought that it was absolutely impenetrable. There was no way that anybody could crack any code encoding that it could do, because the probability of you doing that is quite small. It can be set up in 158 million ways. So what was happening? There were secret radio listening posts all over the UK, and they're called Y stations. And there's thousands in the UK. There's about 300 overseas, and they're listening to long-range radio signals sent by Nazis, and there are operators in Y stations that are trained to take down whatever Morse code they hear. So they write down the code and they send it by courier to Bletchley, and this runs 24/7 because these messages can fly any time of the day. So then it's Bletchley Park's main function to break the code every day, because it's going to change at midnight. Every single day it gets reset. Then they have to, so they decipher, they translate, and then they convert that information to intelligence based on this big filing system. It's almost like a card catalog of data that when you see it, it is one little, a very beautiful card catalog that they would use to cross-reference things. So they're looking for context when they see multiple mentions of different personnel and what location. And so all this intelligence, if they can piece together what do these things mean every day, they call these daily reports ultra. So the Polish had actually cracked Enigma back in 1932. But they did not share that information of how to do it until 1939. They told the Allies, and that was because Poland was going to be invaded, and Britain enters the war this year. So it even gets worse than Enigma. There's subsequent versions of the machine that add even more rotors and more cipher combinations. But British Bletchley Park first broke Enigma codes back in January of 1940, which was pretty impressive considering they only entered the war in September 39. So the intelligence they're looking for are troop locations, outpost locations, things moving, people moving, orders from German high command. So they pretty much knew everything. That it's estimated that by the end of the war, the fact that the Allies can decode Enigma saved 2 years. If it's possible to estimate the value of the decryption. So how do they do it though? It's probability. They can work with a number of things. They can try to eliminate yesterday's codes because they know it'll change. So then they can also look at mistakes that people make. For example, perhaps a weather station always begins their transmission daily with weather report. Some people think they're particularly nationalistic and they end their report daily with Heil Hitler. Well, these are actually helpful. So later, though, Nazi high command starts using a different machine called the Lorenz cipher, and it has 12 rotors, based more so than the 3 or 4 that are in Enigma. So it's way more complex, but it's not nearly as portable. So Enigma is in use throughout the war. So the man that's most famously associated with the Enigma code and cracking it is named Alan Turing. He was a child genius who later became an adult genius, a mathematician, post-PhD work. He taught at Cambridge, and he designed a machine called the bombe, B-O-M-B-E, and it mechanically sorted out probability, and that helped speed up how they could crack the daily Enigma, whatever the code setting was for the day. So he gets credit for being the father of modern supercomputing, but a lot of his research never did get published or recognized because at the time it's covered by the Official Secrets Act. He works for the UK government. He had a rather sad life. He killed himself in 1954. He was only 41. He was homosexual, and at the time Britain had very stiff anti-homosexual laws on the books. And he was convicted and given a choice of either going to prison or being chemically castrated, and he took the latter. So he was but one of 4 Cambridge recruits to Bletchley who eventually They're called the wicked uncles. They're either skilled mathematicians or they're grandmaster level chess players. In one case, both. So though as far as Alan Turing goes, they tried to write after his death, significantly after his death, his treatment in history. In 2009, the British Prime Minister officially offered a public apology for how he was treated. And the Queen pardons him in 2013, and then there's something called the Alan Turing Law that went into place in 2017, and that retroactively pardons men that were either convicted or cautioned under the old rules outlawing homosexuality. So he's one of the 25% of men. We'll talk about the women because there's 75% of them there. As I told you, they do kind of monotonous work and they're working 3 shifts and it can be draining. They had people sometimes need mental breaks. They would go away for a few weeks and come back. But they were always busy and they took people from every walk of life. Some women were recruited as cryptanalysts. Now, the mathematics departments at Oxford and Cambridge really were not full of women. There is that, but they looked farther afield. They were looking at women at universities and debutantes, particularly, because they were especially prized recruits. They're usually from the upper classes in Britain, and they are believed to be more trustworthy. Well, as I said earlier, hint, this will come back to bite them in a few slides. So they even ran a contest in the Telegraph, the Daily Telegraph, to find crossword experts, and they're looking for lateral ways of thinking. They like to recruit people who spoke languages, of course. German's valuable, French too. They also are looking at people who are majoring in the classics, Latin and Greek, because they're used to translating from archaic sorts of languages with pieces missing sometimes. So the people that ran the bomb machines, though, are the Women's Royal Naval Services. They're called the Wrens. So they're kind of up the hierarchy. But the paper, when you go visit Bletchley, it's amazing. They have a big cart wheeled out of the punch cards that they use in a week to automate their processing of messages. They use 2 million a week. And oh, wow, talk about killing trees. But that was the way they worked. So this went on from September of 39, when Britain and France declared war on Germany. They cracked the code there, the Enigma, in January of 40. They refined the bomb, and then there's even further developments in what they're able to do in a machine they call Agnus Dei, Lamb of God. That's helping to kind of go faster. Then there's Colossus, a supercomputer. They're using that on the Lorenz cipher, the ones that are even more complex. VE and VJ Day was in 1945, and they disbanded Bletchley in 1946. So they kind of just say, well, let's say this never happened. But there was some damage already done, and they didn't know it. So in May 1951, 2 very senior British Foreign Office officials disappeared into the cosmos. They surfaced again 5 years later, and now they're in Moscow. They defected to the Soviet Union. So their names were Guy Burgess and Donald MacLean. And it came to light that they were among a number of Cambridge University undergraduates years before who had joined the Communist Party back in the 30s and had enlisted as Soviet agents. So particular to Burgess and MacLean, their co-workers considered them drunk, promiscuous, and unstable, and yet they're still allowed to elevate themselves in British intelligence, because Britain still implicitly trusts members of this class hierarchy, and they fit the profile. They're Cambridge grads. So they did not care for this back in the US, because we're working closely with British intelligence. So the US tells Britain perhaps they can clean house and find out if they've got leaks, but they didn't really get any further clues until 1963, when they lose someone else, the man in the middle, Kim Philby. He's perhaps the most famous. He defects to the USSR, and in the course of his spectacular leaving, that he writes a book and he outs people. So he outs the fourth of what would become the Cambridge Five, named Anthony Blunt, Anthony Blunt was the art curator to the Queen. He was a very well-known art historian, and the Queen is mortified that she was ever unbeknowingly associated with this person. So he's stripped of his knighthood. He's no longer Sir Anthony Blunt, and he's given immunity in exchange for confessing. And they never prosecute him, though. He kind of just goes away and lives his life out in the UK. And then until 1990, did they know they have a fifth? They don't find out until another defector gives up the story. So a Russian spy that the UK had hosted, basically, had defected to the UK, told them about John Cairncross. And his damage, well, he'd actually stuffed his trousers and briefcase with Enigma data from Bletchley and given it to USSR. Oh boy. And he was never prosecuted either. So in the most damaging of this, though, was the human toll in that Kim Philby named names. And he caused the deaths of many double agents that were working for Britain. And if not deaths, he certainly blew many covers. One spectacular cover he blew was of John le Carré. Now, at the time, he was not known then as that. He was David Cornwell. His dates are 1939 to 2020. So he was an MI5 and MI6 agent in his life. His cover was that he was a British diplomat in Germany. So his pedigree, he had a first-class degree in modern languages from Oxford. So there you see, he's in the circle, and he's able to ingratiate himself into certain ways of being and so the services. And he spoke French beautifully. He spoke German fluently, and he taught these languages at Eton. Oh, another big name school. So he's daunting. In his personal life, he certainly goes by David all his life, but he doesn't like to give interviews. So what little is known, he wrote himself, or he very reluctantly ever told the press. So he'd never say exactly, but it's thought that he was likely recruited into the intelligence services by contacts he made while he was a student at Oxford, because that's a common fishing ground for both spy recruiters for Britain and other countries. So in 1964, Le Carré's identity and cover got blown when he's working as a British diplomat in Germany by Kim Philby. He hates Kim Philby for the rest of his life. In fact, he's researching a book called The Russia House many years later. Kim Philby's still living in Moscow once he's defected. And Kim Philby wants to meet him. They were former co-workers, and John le Carré won't have it. He absolutely refuses. Well, it is a bit of a problem in his real life that he had a kind of a sad upbringing that really informed what he would become. It was caused by his father, Ronald Cornwell, Ronnie. He was he was dead by 1975, so he's a professional con man, a very large-scale bankrupt. He didn't say that he hadn't seen some prison in his time, so he abused David Cornwell's mother, and that led to his mother leaving their family. There were two brothers, David and his other brother, when David was 5. And they told those boys their mother died. But that wasn't true. He found that out when he was 21, that he finally got to meet his mother. So his childhood's very chaotic. He did say as an interview, the only relationship that I had as I grew up was with my father, a mercurial, enormously attractive, and totally amoral person who was by profession, not to put too fine an edge on of it, a confidence trickster, and saw the inside of a number of prisons in his lifetime. The effect of that continues to haunt me. So he says later he's a professional liar. John le Carré becomes a professional liar. He could do it in working as a spy. He also did it in writing. So for an example, his dad is something else. He would start him in schools where he couldn't pay tuition, and he would attempt to barter his tuition in the form of black market contraband, like liquor during World War II. You couldn't get your hands on it, lemons, things like that, that they're just not available. He once posed as his business manager and took a tour of a TV studio in Germany. He makes orders on his behalf. He injects himself later into his son's life, and he was a hard person to live with. He's also a known associate of these guys, serious English gangsters called the Cray Twins, who were active in the late 50s to 68. And I mean, they were implicated in all sorts: murder, armed robbery, arson. Oddly enough, London society was frequently pictured with them in the magazines. They would have their arms around them at nightclubs. So they're these notorious crime bosses that Ronnie Cornwell was a known associate of, and ultimately those guys, the Cray twins, get life in prison. So David Cornwell does use his past, in particular in one book, that is his father, when he's thinking about what it was like to have somebody as a criminal in your family, and it's called The Perfect Spy, that came out in 1986. The LA Times really liked it, Le Carre's best book. So he said that of all his novels, this was the work he was most proud of and would be something a therapist recommend that he wrote. So when he was a spy, he used to interrogate in German people leaving Iron Curtain countries. He recruited and ran British agents, he tapped phone lines, he facilitated break-ins, and when he was a student at Oxford, he would keep tabs on fellow students known to be in far-left and possible Soviet agent circles. So it so happened, though, his personal life later gets quite complex. He had a super fan, and he still does, he's still alive, another writer named Robert Harris. Robert Harris is fairly well known if you read historical fiction, and in the last year or two, he had a bit of a resurgence. One of his great books, Conclave, got made into a movie that people have seen. So he wanted to write Le Carre's biography. So he got dug in a little bit, but he abandoned that project once he interviewed Le Carre's first wife. And that was, he couldn't feel like he could do a truthful version without discussing lots and lots and lots of extramarital affairs. He worked under secrecy and lies frequently. So Harris didn't want to root around in his personal life that way, so he just gave up on that project. So one of the real life corollaries to a famous Le Carre character is largely thought to be this guy. That's Jack Bingham, 7th Baron Clanmorris. So he is a mentor of David Cornwell while he is in MI5 and 6. So personally, though, Jack Bingham, well, during World War II, was working for MI5, and he's meant to run operations that would keep Nazi sympathizers at bay, that they were living on British soil, and he would concoct plots to make them think that they're helping the Nazi cause, when really they're just staying A, monitored, and B, out of the way of people who really didn't want them to interfere with the Allies' work. So it's largely thought that he's a major influence of the character that would be George Smiley. That was first from Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy in John le Carre's books. So he and David Cornwell are close friends and co-workers. A bit of a clue. In French, Le Carré means, one of the meanings is the square, and that was Jack Bingham's nickname. So intelligence rules said that David Cornwell couldn't publish under his own name, so he needs to pick this new pen name. But then they kind of drifted, because once Le Carré started publishing, Bingham didn't really care for how British intelligence was being portrayed. So Le Carré, though, when he's interviewed, he says he detested the idea that our spies are uniformly immaculate, omniscient, and beyond the vulgar criticism of those who not only pay for their existence, but on occasion are taken to war on the strength of concocted intelligence. So a lot of his themes are something in the establishment is rotten. There's someone crooked and higher up the food chain. So there's this distrust kind of that runs as a vein through his work. Oh my, was he ever prolific? So 26 novels. He wrote an autobiography too. So a lot of these are still in development as TV series or movies. There's quite a few, actually. The one I need to catch up on is the second season of The Night Manager. The first one was on Amazon Prime, and it was terrific. So he really, though, wanted to be different than Ian Fleming because he did not mince words. When he didn't speak on the record, he was quite outspoken. He thought Ian Fleming was cultural pornography. He said it was a very weird thing being in the secret world and watching the literary extension of it as a kind of saccharine version of a life we didn't live. Anybody involved in it, I think, would have been aware of the human cost, the incompetence, the constant cock-ups. Espionage needed some kind of serious treatment. So George Smiley is kind of the polar opposite of James Bond. He's not very flashy. He's pretty ordinary, certainly not glamorous. So Le Carre starts to write about Cold War themes, but then he kind of pulls things from the headlines over time. Things like the conflict between Israel and Palestine, that's in The Little Drummer Girl. Big Pharma in Africa, that's in The Constant Gardener. And then The Night Manager was about international arms dealing. So our last stop in our writer journey is Mick Herron. So no, he was not in the services. He's not covered by the Official Secrets Act. And he's very much alive and well. So he's just born in 1963. Nowadays, he's a full-time novelist. He began writing full-time in 2017. Before that, for many, many, many years, he was a sub-editor. He worked for an employment law brief, a trade magazine, basically. And he was a London to Oxford commuter on the 7th of July, 2005, and that was a huge underground bombing. And that, he says, is when he thought he might like to start writing about thrillers and espionage. So he's got a pretty modest background. He's educated at Oxford, but he doesn't really run, from what I've read, in the circles that the other three would have necessarily. So if you've read any of his work, it's certainly espionage, but it's also almost equal parts bad work environment. It talks a lot about the frustrations, and a lot of us can relate to working with people you don't like. And he says this about it. I wrote about people who were having a bad time at work. The larger the organization was that I worked for, the less concern it had for the people working for it. So the first breakout book of his, not his first book altogether, but his hit is Slow Horses. It's a, what would you call it? A slow burn. It came out in 2010, actually. And the Wall Street Journal likes it very much, the best spy novelist since John le Carré. So originally, his first book came out in 2003. It was called Down Cemetery Road, which has been made into a miniseries with Emma Thompson. But this Slow Horses series, so it first came out in 2010. He has a publisher. Based on low sales, he gets dropped. So his agent did not give up on him, though. The agent approached a American-based publisher instead. So the premise of Slow Horses, it's about these kind of second-rate spies. They have all done something wrong, and they have loused up in some fairly profound way. And instead of just firing them or killing them off, they've been warehoused together at this slough house. And that's a play on word. The people who are there are the slow horses, meaning they're kind of lagging behind the rest of the group. So they're very dysfunctional. The guy that leads it, the character is named Jackson Lamb, and he's notoriously flatulent. So there's a lot of comedy that runs through it too. It's just the awfulness sometimes of working for these huge bureaucracies with people you don't like. So the American press picked it up. And then he has a series, so they continue to publish it. They start to nominate him for crime writing awards, which he starts winning. Then a British editor sees the American version of Slow Horses in a UK railway station, buys it, reads it, wonders why it's not published in the UK. He works for Hachette, which is a huge publisher, so they buy the UK rights. And they got Waterstones to make it a book of the month. They're like Barnes and Noble. So by the time 2017 rolls around, he's doing very well. He sells the TV rights. He quits his day job, which is the dream of all writers. And then NPR came to give him a glowing review. And that led him to sell 2,000 books in a day. And the whole month they sold 20,000 copies. And that was more than that book had ever sold in the 7 years it had been out before. So now he's a phenomenon, and you can see his latest was September Clown Town. And the book, though, Slow Horses, was made into an Apple TV series. It's their longest running series. So they've been renewed for series 5 and 6, so it'll be on Apple TV for quite some time. I like to think Gary Oldman can do whatever as an actor. So he plays Jackson Lamb, this notoriously flatulent spy master. And oh, just a slob, really. He's kind of painful to look at sometimes. In the Slow Horses adaptation on Apple TV. Incidentally, he was also George Smiley in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Now, it's been done a couple times, but in the most recent version, there he was. So he's actually got a common link between two of our spy writers. So I thought I've got to end it somewhere. So if anybody might have had any questions as I was talking, please, you were in a webinar today, so you can drop them into the chat. I give a very, very brief plug. I say that when I was in the UK, my notes were not secret. I wrote them down, and now they're a book. It's high tea and the low down. So within your lending library system, I know there are libraries that have access to it if you'd like to borrow it, or you can buy it by name wherever you prefer. So I will come back to you, and here I am. And we'll wait for a second to see if we've got any questions. Any questions?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm just going to say I love Slow Horses. Love
Isn't
that show.
that,
It's
see,
great. And
yes,
I
I
also
have
was
it.
a
Mhm.
huge Chitty Chitty Bang Bang lover as a child.
Did you know that about Ian Fleming?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
wow.
just,
You're a
because
super fan.
yeah, and my dad's a huge 007 James Bond person, so I grew up with all of that. So it was really fun.
We bought an estate that included all of the paperback original Ian Flemings from when they came out, and I thought, oh wow, what fun! And you know though, with a modern sensibility, they're kind of hard to read, especially if you're female. I think.
Mm.
Yeah, I cringe, but
Yeah,
oh well. I
old
think
school.
to be fair, Mick Herron does a fine job with women characters.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was surprised too. The book and the have you seen Slow Horses on Apple?
Yep.
Yeah, it diverges. It
Yep.
isn't necessarily true to the book, but I don't mind.
Right. No, but I do, and I love the show too. It's just so good.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's one of the few times where you can say they didn't follow the book, but it worked out fine.
Right.
That you're not let down by if you've read the book ahead of time and then you watch it, you're almost prepared to go, but not. I didn't find that to be true.
No, me either.
All right. Well, two thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat. So let's see. But
Okay.
well, thank
Well,
you for coming and talking about this. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was wonderful, and hopefully everybody else did that was in the chat.
oh great. Well, thank you for the comments coming in, and now you can decode to your heart's content. Not that you need to speak in code to anyone, but you're equipped. So, all right. Well, thanks
Awesome.
again. Have a good day.
Thanks, Claire. Bye-bye.
Bye.